I don't even know when it started, not exactly. It wasn't a thunderbolt or some movie-perfect moment. More like a drift. A slow turn in the air every time I saw her. Most mornings, I stopped by the corner cafe before heading to class. Not because the coffee was good, it wasn't, but because it was on my way, and it gave me something to do with my hands before the day started. She always came in around the same time, 5 minutes after me. Carrying a thermos, though she still ordered tea. Earl Grey. I'd noticed. She wasn't young. Mid-40s, maybe. But there was something about the way she carried herself, like she'd seen enough life to be unbothered by small inconveniences. And yet, she was never careless. She always smoothed the sleeve of her coat before sitting, as if she didn't trust the chair to behave on its own. The first time she spoke to me, it was because the barista messed up my order. "They gave you my drink," she said, sliding a cup toward me. "Unless you like Earl Grey?" I shook my head. "No, that's yours. I don't even know what Earl Grey is supposed to taste like." Her mouth tugged into a small smile. Not big. Just enough to make me notice how soft her voice had been. Like bergamot. Which probably doesn't help if you don't know what that is either. We didn't exchange names that day. Just a shared half-laugh, the kind that drifts off because neither of you knows if you're supposed to keep going. It became a pattern. She'd come in, I'd already be there, and somehow, without planning, we ended up at the same corner of the cafe. Not sitting together. Just, within reach. She remembered what I ordered. "Still black coffee, no sugar," she asked once, and I caught myself staring at the way she tapped her cup lightly before setting it down. "Yeah," I said, pretending it wasn't a big deal. Pretending it didn't feel like the first time in weeks someone had noticed me enough to remember anything. The truth was, I didn't have much going on. Friends had scattered after high school, my phone mostly stayed silent. Sometimes I typed out texts, jokes, things I wanted to share, but I never hit send. They just sat there, little drafts in the dark. So when she asked, "Do you always come here before class?" I almost dropped my cup. It wasn't much of a question. But it was the first time she'd tried to draw a thread between us. "Yeah," I said, then added too quickly, "It's on my way." She nodded like she believed me, but there was this pause. A silence that lingered longer than it should have, as if she was waiting for me to say something else. I didn't. I just folded the edge of my napkin into smaller and smaller triangles, until it couldn't fold anymore. It's strange, how you can go from being invisible to someone, to being quietly expected. Not loudly. Not, "Sit with me." More like, when she looked up, her eyes flicked toward the door, as if checking that I was there. That morning, she left before I did. She stood, smoothing her coat sleeve like always, and gave me a small nod on her way out. It should have ended there. Another ordinary day. But 10 minutes later, when I finally packed up my bag, I saw my phone light up with a message from an unknown number. "Next time, try the Earl Grey." Just once. I stared at it for a long time, not sure whether to smile or to wonder how she even had my number. Either way, I didn't delete it. The text sat in my phone for 3 days before I answered. I kept opening it, staring at the words, then pocketing the phone again. Try the Earl Grey. Just once. Finally, I typed, "Only if you promise it won't ruin coffee for me forever." Then I set the phone down, telling myself not to wait for a reply. She answered in under a minute. No promises. The next morning, I ordered the tea. It was strange, floral, citrusy. Not bad, not good, just different. She was already at her table when I sat down across from her. I hadn't planned to, but the seat was empty, and something about her half-smile told me she'd been waiting. "Well?" she asked. "It tastes like a plant pretending to be fancy," I said. She laughed, an actual laugh, not the usual polite half-smile. Her hand covered her mouth for a second, like she hadn't expected it to escape. I couldn't stop staring. Not at her laugh, exactly, but at the way it felt, like I'd cracked open some hidden part of her day. Later, when the cafe grew quieter, she told me about her divorce. Not in detail, just that she lived alone now, the house too big for one person, and sometimes she left the TV on so it wouldn't feel so empty. I wanted to say something back. To tell her I knew that kind of quiet, too, the kind that presses against your chest when you unlock the door to an empty apartment. But the words stayed locked inside me. Instead, I said, "Do you ever get used to it?" Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the streetlight was just flicking off. "You don't," she said softly. "You just stop noticing how heavy it is." I nodded, though I didn't really know what she meant. Still, I felt the weight of it. That was when the risk began to press in. She was twice my age. A neighbor. Someone I wasn't supposed to think about like this. I told myself it was just conversation, just tea, just coincidence. But my eyes kept flicking toward her hands, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup, the small rings she wore, the faint lines across her knuckles. I imagined what people would say if they saw us here together, if they knew how much space she'd begun to take up in my thoughts. I pushed the idea away. But it always came back. When we left the cafe that morning, she held the door open for me. A simple thing, nothing unusual. But as I passed by, her hand brushed against mine. Just the slightest graze. I don't know if she meant it. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe not. But I felt it, more than I should have. Enough to keep me awake that night, replaying it in my head. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next week, she wasn't at the cafe. Her table was empty, her usual thermos absent. I told myself it didn't matter. People have lives, schedules change. Still, I lingered longer than usual, sipping at cold coffee until the barista started wiping down nearby tables like a hint. 2 days later, she appeared again. Not at the cafe, but outside our building. I'd been fumbling with my keys when I saw her carrying groceries, the paper bag tugging at her arms. "You're back," I said before I could stop myself. "Was I gone?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I shrugged, embarrassed. "I just didn't see you." Her smile was faint, almost apologetic. "Had to deal with a few things." She didn't explain, and I didn't ask. I offered to carry the bag. She hesitated, just for a second, then handed it over. Inside her apartment, it was quieter than I expected. Books stacked along the wall, a lamp left on though it was mid-afternoon. The faint smell of tea. "Thanks," she said, taking the groceries. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said. "I wanted to." We ended up in her kitchen, standing too close while she unpacked. She handed me an orange without looking at me. "Here. For the help." I peeled it slowly, watching the way her hands shook slightly as she unwrapped a loaf of bread. Maybe from the weight of the bags. Or maybe not. There was a silence then, thick, heavier than the space we usually shared in the cafe. "You should go," she said quietly. Not unkind. Just firm. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to tell her I didn't want to. But my throat tightened. Instead, I nodded. "Yeah. I should." At the door, she added, almost to herself, "You're too young for this." The words landed sharp, though her tone was soft. I didn't answer. Just stood there, unsure whether she was protecting me, or herself, or both. The next morning, I skipped the cafe. I told myself it was to give her space. But the truth was, I didn't trust myself not to look at her the way I did. By the third day, I caved. She was there, already seated, a book open beside her untouched tea. When she saw me, something flickered across her face, relief, maybe. Or regret. "Back to coffee?" she asked, glancing at my cup. "Couldn't stay away," I said, before realizing how it sounded. She didn't answer, but her eyes held mine a little too long. We talked about nothing that morning. Weather, traffic, the book she wasn't really reading. But in the spaces between words, everything pressed closer. When I left, she walked with me to the door. For a second, neither of us moved. My hand brushed the frame, hers hovered inches from my sleeve. It would have been easy, too easy, to lean in. To let the moment spill over. But she pulled back first. A sharp inhale, averted eyes. "See you," she said. And just like that, the moment folded shut, leaving me standing in the doorway, wondering what might have happened if I hadn't let her move first. It happened on a Thursday. We left the cafe at the same time, falling into step without really planning it. The air was cool, the kind that makes you want to walk slower. She carried her thermos, I shoved my hands in my jacket pockets. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, like both of us were waiting for the other to say the thing we weren't supposed to. When we reached the park, she stopped at a bench. "Just for a minute," she said, sitting down. I followed, leaving a careful space between us. We watched a group of kids kicking a ball across the grass, their laughter spilling into the air. Her gaze lingered on them, but her shoulders seemed to sink. "I used to bring my son here," she said quietly. "Years ago. He doesn't live nearby anymore. College, friends, his own world now." She paused. "It goes fast, you know. Faster than you're ready for." I nodded, not sure what to do with her sadness. I wanted to close the distance between us, but instead, I said, "He's lucky to have you." She looked at me then, really looked. Her eyes searching my face like she was trying to read something I hadn't meant to give away. "You say that like you know me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe I do," I said before I could stop myself. Her breath caught. A small, sharp sound. Then she looked away, her fingers tightening around the thermos. We sat in silence again, but it wasn't the same silence. Something was trembling underneath it. Finally, she said, "You shouldn't, you don't know what this is. What you're doing." "What I'm doing?" I asked, my voice low. "You're the one who texted me first. You're the one who—" I stopped, realizing how close I was to saying too much. Her head turned sharply. "Who what?" I hesitated. My throat worked, but the words snagged. Finally, I muttered, "Who sees me?" Her face softened, just for a second. Then she shook her head. "You're too young to understand what that means." The words stung more than I expected. "Maybe I'm young," I said. "But that doesn't mean I don't feel it." She pressed her lips together, as if holding something back. Her eyes flicked toward me, then away again. Her hand shifted on the bench, so close I could have reached for it without even moving much. I almost did. My fingers twitched. But she pulled her hand back into her lap, holding it tight like she was afraid it might betray her. The moment stretched, sharp and fragile. She exhaled slowly, like she'd been carrying something too heavy. Then she asked, almost to herself, "What are we doing?" And for once, I didn't have an answer. After that day on the bench, things shifted. Not in a way you could point to, but I felt it. She stopped coming to the cafe. At first, I thought it was coincidence, a change in her schedule. But then a week passed. 2. I told myself I wouldn't notice. That I could just drink my coffee like before, headphones in, eyes on my phone. But every time the door opened, my chest tightened like it was rehearsing disappointment. She didn't come. One night, late, I saw her light on through her apartment window. The glow cut across the dark street, steady and warm. I stood there longer than I should have, key in my hand, wondering if I should knock. I didn't. Instead, I sat on my bed and typed out a message I never sent. "Are you okay? Did I do something?" I erased it. Tried again. "I miss our mornings. Deleted that too. The draft sat there, glowing quietly in the corner of my screen, until the battery died. A few days later, I ran into her in the hallway. She looked different. Polished. Lipstick, a coat I hadn't seen before. For a second, I wondered if she'd been out with someone. The thought made something in my chest twist. "Hey," I said, too casual. She hesitated before answering. "Hi." Just that. Nothing else. No smile, no shared glance. Like we were back to strangers passing in the building. I wanted to ask where she'd been, why she hadn't come to the cafe. Instead, I said, "You look nice." Her eyes flicked away. "I had dinner with my son. He was in town." It was reasonable, ordinary. But the way she said it, tight, clipped, made it feel like an excuse. And then she stepped around me, keys in hand, her perfume trailing as she walked away. The next morning, her table at the cafe was empty again. My cup went cold while I sat there, staring at the seat that should have been hers. A friend from class stopped by and asked, "You waiting for someone?" I shook my head too quickly. "No. Just studying." But I wasn't. I hadn't even opened my notebook. That night, I wrote her another message. "If you want me to stop, just say so. I won't bother you." My thumb hovered over send for almost a full minute. But I didn't press it. I just let the screen dim, the words swallowed by the dark. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. It happened on a rainy evening. Not dramatic thunder or flashing skies, just steady rain, the kind that makes the street smell sharp and clean. I was unlocking my door when I heard hers open. She stood there with a bag of groceries, damp hair clinging to her face. I don't know why, but I moved before thinking. "Here, let me," I said, reaching for the bag. She hesitated, then let me take it. Inside her apartment, the light was warm, the air carrying the faint smell of tea again. I set the bag on the counter, trying not to look like I was waiting for an invitation to stay. "Thanks," she said. Her voice was soft. "Tired?" I nodded, ready to leave, when she added, "You've stopped coming." It caught me. "So did you." Her lips pressed together. She busied herself with the groceries, pulling out apples one by one, setting them carefully in a bowl. "I thought it would be easier." "Was it?" I asked. She froze for a second. Then shook her head, almost imperceptibly. The silence that followed was thick, pressing against both of us. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out anyway. "I don't know what this is," I said quietly. "But it's the first time in a long time I've felt like someone sees me. And if I'm wrong, if I've been imagining it, just tell me." Her hands stilled on the counter. She didn't turn around right away. When she did, her eyes were tired but clear. "You're not imagining it," she said. The air seemed to tilt then, the weight of everything we hadn't said pulling close. "But it scares me," she added. "Because I don't know what you'll want from me tomorrow. And I don't know what I have left to give." I stepped closer, slowly, careful not to startle the fragile honesty between us. "I don't want tomorrow," I said. "I just want right now." Her laugh was small, almost broken. "You don't know how dangerous that sounds." "Maybe," I said. "But it's true." She looked at me then, really looked, like she was searching for a lie in my face. Whatever she found must have disarmed her, because her shoulders lowered, the tension leaving in a long exhale. For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain against the window filled the silence, steady and unrelenting. Then, slowly, she reached out. Her hand brushed mine, tentative, barely there. But it was enough. I didn't take it. I didn't press or hold. I just let the contact exist, fragile and human, heavier than anything I could have said. She whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "Okay." And it was. For that moment, it was. Time didn't change everything at once. It was smaller than that. We didn't suddenly start sitting together every morning. Some days she came, some days she didn't. Some days I lingered too long, other days I slipped out without a word. But gradually, the pauses between us grew less sharp. The cafe stopped being coincidence. It became habit. A quiet corner at 8:47 a.m., my black coffee, her Earl Grey. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we didn't. And that was enough. One afternoon, months later, we found ourselves back at the same park bench. Not planned. Just where our walk led us. The kids were there again, chasing a ball across the grass. She watched them with that same distant look, the one that used to weigh her down. But this time, when her shoulders sank, I nudged my cup of coffee against her thermos. A small gesture. No words. She smiled, not wide, not for anyone else to notice, but enough. Her apartment didn't feel so empty anymore, though neither of us said why. Sometimes I helped carry groceries, sometimes we sat in her kitchen in silence, peeling oranges, sipping tea. I learned to drink it without making a face. She still teased me for preferring coffee. It wasn't a story people would talk about. No big confessions. No promises carved in stone. Just two people who had been lonely in different ways, finding out they didn't have to be anymore. One evening, as I was leaving her place, she stopped me at the door. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. I didn't pretend to misunderstand. I thought about it. About the age, the differences, the way people might look at us if they knew. Then I shook my head. No. Do you? She hesitated, then touched the edge of my sleeve like she had that night months ago. A soft, steady touch this time. No, she whispered. And that was the closest either of us came to calling it love. Now, when I think back to the first time she texted me, "Try the Earl Grey," I realize it wasn't about the tea. It was her way of asking if I'd meet her halfway. If I'd sit with her in the quiet, even when it tasted strange. And I did. I still do. Some stories don't need an ending. They just need a place to rest for a while. For us, it's 8:47 a.m. A black coffee. An Earl Grey. And a silence that finally feels like home.